Depending on your definition of speak, I speak between 5 to 7 languages. But not only did I fail most language classes I took growing up, I also forgot my native language. As for how I forgot my native language, my story is weirdly typical. I found hundreds of thousands of similar stories in academic research, and I've also recently made about a dozen friends who have similar stories. So I'm going to be telling you my story as to how I forgot my native language, but I'm going to be positioning it in this larger academic discussion. There are patterns as to why people in English-speaking countries statistically do forget their native language. So I'll make my story fun, but I'll also cite a bunch of academic resources, which I will link in the description below. My name is Marissa. I've been a polyglot language Instagrammer for about a year, and I've been hiding this story from not only everybody who follows me over there, but pretty much everybody in my life. It's time to come clean. My language story started when I first started learning languages, as a baby, like you. I grew up in a Polish community inside the US. My parents moved to the US before I was born, from Poland, so we spoke Polish at home. And most of my parents' friends were Polish too, so we spoke Polish together. I distinctly remember English being around, like on TV and in the neighborhood, but we spoke Polish. It really was my native language. Like, I remember not knowing the word for yellow for a really long time in English. I don't think I could make the TH sound in English because we don't have that in Polish until probably 3rd or 4th grade. And I remember preferring to speak Polish because it felt easier. A lot of my family and people in the community were bilingual, but no matter what, with my mom and my grandparents, we spoke Polish, period. And this experience is super common for the firstborn kids in families whose families came over just before they were born, like mine, or kids who came over to the US when they were really little. No one's assimilating overnight. Sure, there might be English spoken in the stores or with the government, but at home you're gonna speak your own language because you're more comfortable speaking that language. But then I started elementary school. So on top of all of this English floating around on the TV and in the neighborhood, I was suddenly in English immersion for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, just doing English stuff. I mean, think about it. In school, you might learn fun jobs like astronaut or firefighter. But when is my Polish mom, in the context of my house, going to say the word astronaut? Plus, I was getting all of these lessons in the alphabet, reading, writing, sentences in English. My parents weren't going to teach me Polish grammar. They had full-time jobs. And when we did speak together, sure, we spoke Polish, but we spoke in the house about things relating to the house. We weren't speaking about different kinds of shapes or fun jobs or whatever else you learn in kindergarten. Linguists call this moment acquisition disruption. You're acquiring your language normally at home and everything's going great like every little kid. But then something happens. My daily contact with Polish was totally disrupted because I went to school. Plus, my family was bilingual, so if I didn't know the Polish word for diamond, I could just say the whole sentence in Polish, but use the English word for diamond, which I had learned in school, which they could also understand. So I didn't even really need to keep improving my Polish at that point. So Polish went very quickly from my native language to just this little home language, because I could still speak Polish. We still spoke it at home, but my English was just becoming a lot stronger until my parents got divorced. One of the big reasons a language might not be transmitted between generations or fully developed by kids is because of something called exogamy. Exogamy is just when 2 different cultures or groups marry into each other. So my mom married my stepdad, who's from Pakistan, so we spoke English at home. My dad spent most of my childhood with an American girlfriend, so we spoke English at home. Now, there are way worse reasons for why somebody might stop speaking their language at home than the introduction of more adults who also left them. In the US and Canada, little Indigenous kids were kidnapped from their families as recently as the 60s and 70s and put into English-only boarding schools where their languages were destroyed. Latino immigrants have faced violence in the US for speaking Spanish in public. They might not want to pass down that language because they're afraid for their kids. Even European populations, like the Louisiana settlers, who have been here speaking French for hundreds of years, have been incorrectly told by the US government that if they raised their children to be bilingual, their kids would be stupid. Now, in all of this, I also have a younger brother, and his story is typical of younger siblings. Think about it, when my brother was born, 3 years after me, my family had been in the country for 3 years longer, so we were a little bit more adjusted to being in an English-speaking country. Plus, when I was 5, I hit my English wall, and so I started speaking English to him when he was only 2. That means his acquisitional disruption, his big wall of English, happened when he was really little, 3 years earlier than mine happened. But I still loved being Polish. I found my mom's old textbooks from her childhood and tried to teach myself to read Polish. I begged them for more like shows and movies and TV in Polish. And I loved doing Polish things. Like, I felt very Polish. And there are some community resources for populations that want to keep their language alive even when they're in a different country. In the Polish community, we have Saturday schools, just like I think a lot of the Korean communities and some other nationalities do. It's a school where you basically go on, we call it Saturday school. You basically just go on a Saturday and they just teach you Polish. They teach you Polish grammar. They teach you how to write in Polish. They teach you how to read in Polish. And what's really cool is indigenous communities who had that kind of chain of language broken have started these things called language nests, which are like preschools, but where the kids can just do language immersion with elders in their community and kind of rebuild that chain. This is hugely important because there are still huge populations in the US who want to reclaim their language and without really big efforts aren't going to be able to. But the problem is that studies haven't necessarily found that these things help with the language. They might help with culture, identity, and self-esteem, but they by themselves aren't going to help make sure a language is transmitted, revived, kept at a high level. And my parents, for whatever reason, didn't even send me to these types of schools. I never got more books in Polish, I never got more VHSs in Polish. I'm not really sure why. They kind of were just like, oh, we just didn't. So even though I wanted to, I couldn't really make my Polish any better. I didn't have the resources. And eventually my home language, which I was pretty good at, just became this abstract heritage language. And in fact, that's what this type of language, native language, is called. It's a heritage language. I had almost no contact by the time I was 12 with Polish unless I went to Poland and was forced by my relatives there to speak it with them. I obviously made friends outside of the Polish community here in the US, and we spoke English. And by this point, my family's English was so flawless that it didn't make any sense at all to speak in Polish, even if it was just me and my mom. By the time I was 15, I didn't even want to use it. That's because there's a ton of emotional baggage with heritage language speakers. Now, we've covered some of the systematic stuff. English-only schools, a lack of resources, social pressure to integrate, but there are also two big emotional blocks that can stop somebody from fully developing or relearning their heritage language. First of all, heritage language speakers are in a no-win situation. If you're good at the language, well, obviously you should be. It's your language. You'll never be given the same social status as somebody who becomes bilingual in these same two languages as an adult. And if you are not good at your language, it's extremely shameful. You have this huge pressure from your family and the community to be able to speak flawlessly, even though they were the adults that were in charge with your education as a kid. Like it's somehow your fault. And I can imagine for non-white heritage language speakers that this is 10 times worse because of super racist comments like, but where are you really from? So what happens because of this no-win situation? We're reluctant to keep talking. And like I said, by high school, I didn't want to speak Polish because it was really hard to find the right words. I specifically remember my mother's brother super criticizing me because I was making little errors or not making the right sounds when I was speaking. Heritage language learners can spiral from being little bilingual babies to what we call passive bilinguals, bilinguals that can understand stuff but can't or won't actually speak in the language. And if they're like my younger brother, the second or third or fourth sibling in a family, they might not even be able to understand the language that they spoke when they were little. Now what I'm going to go into is my first attempt to relearn my native language as an adult. Like I said in the beginning, I'm a polyglot now, so I'll also go into what I've learned about learning languages as an adult. But if you like this video so far, my whole YouTube channel is dedicated to helping people like me or with stories that are maybe a little bit different to relearning their heritage languages. Remember, I went from this linguistic train wreck to an actual polyglot. If you're interested in language learning or maybe in heritage languages, hit subscribe below. But then after this video, go check out my playlists because they're going to help you do things like learn from my mistakes, find some awesome new resources you've never heard about, and kind of just learn more about heritage languages. But now let's get back to my first attempt to relearning my native language, which I had totally forgotten, in college. At this point, I assumed that languages were very hard to learn and I was a linguistic failure. Not only had I forgotten my native language, but during this whole process, I also bombed out of high school Spanish. But I held out hope in college because I was determined. I still really strongly identified with being Polish. And in theory, it was my native language, right? So it should come back quickly, right? It did not. It did not come back quickly. I actually hate telling the story. I hate telling the story. 101 Polish grammar class actually turned out. This sucks. I'm making an informational video right now, but like this actually sucks. 101 Polish grammar class actually turned out to be one of probably the hardest class I took in university and one of my lowest grades. I was given grammar worksheets and verb charts and these weird vocabulary lists that just felt foreign to me. It was like a different language. I had no connection to this language I was being taught. I had no idea how all these rules I was learning were going to help me speak my native language again. I spent a super long and miserable semester confirming that I was terrible at languages because I couldn't even pass a language class in my own native language. But there was a lot of reasons why I was set up to fail by the system. Once again, maybe you're noticing a pattern between heritage language speakers and systems. The biggest thing is that heritage language speakers and second language learners have very different needs when it comes to being in a language classroom. I didn't need to work on things like my pronunciation because I could already do that, but I still had to schlep through a few weeks of doing that with the second language learners because they had never spoken Polish and they needed it. I also had a lot of instinct about my language. Like I knew that it was pani ma. Like in English, you might know that it's she drank, not she drinked. Those instincts should have been strengthened, but instead I was distanced from them by things like complicated charts. Simply put, heritage language learners and heritage language speakers have very different needs than second language learners, and my university wasn't meeting those needs. Finally, it all came crashing down during a conversation with another professor from another department. I was doing a project based on Polish history because even though I couldn't speak the language, I was still Polish and I could enjoy my culture and my roots through the media of English, but doing other things. So this old white guy tells me to my face, "Well, remember, you're approaching the subject like an American, not as a Polish person." But I am a Polish person, I'm a dual citizen. I have 2 passports. My parents are from Poland. "Oh, well, you don't speak the language, do you?" "Actually, it's my native language." "Well, okay, so say something." And at that moment, I thought, oh, maybe I should just stop saying I'm Polish. In an English-speaking country, the erasure of our identities is total and absolute. I went the next 7 years thinking I was a language failure because of how bad all of these experiences were. One day I'll tell the full story as to how I started learning Spanish, but basically for my job I really needed to at least be able to produce some Spanish, and that combined with like a kind of weird moment in my life led me to being in Mexico one day, learning Spanish in immersion. I thought like it might take me a decade to learn, but eventually if I just keep doing it, something will have to click. And actually I started speaking conversationally after a few months because I just had really good instruction. But my block with Polish was still there. So I got fluent in Spanish and I wanted to try another language, but it couldn't be Polish. So I started studying French in Canada. Eventually I realized Immersion wasn't actually key. It was just really good methods, really good resources, and a whole bunch of other tricks. Anyone really can learn a language as long as they're set up to succeed and not set up to fail. So I started studying languages like Catalan, Portuguese, Italian, and eventually German. I've never been to places where those languages are spoken. Mas sim, agora eu posso falar deles. All while ignoring my native language. My anxiety and imposter syndrome have been out of control this entire time because I'm pretty deep into the language learning community now. Like, I know people who are not Polish who speak good Polish. And now, if you're curious about language learning in general, like I said, I have a ton of resources and really specific playlists on my channel, so head over there after this video. But if you've forgotten your heritage language, or you know somebody who has, or maybe you have and so have all your cousins, this next segment is for you. If you know somebody who's struggling with their heritage language, with their identity, with all of this stuff, please send them this video so they can just feel a little less alone. I really wish somebody had said this to me earlier. Listen to me. First of all, it's not your fault. You were a kid. There were adults whose job it was to educate you. You're not stupid. You're not a failure. You're not bad at languages. It's not your fault. Second, you and your family are victims of imperialism. Your culture was taken away from you by racist tools. Third, if you are smart enough and capable enough to find this video and do a basic Google search, you are smart enough to take back your language and to take back your culture if you want to. Language learning as an adult is possible. It can be a fun and amazing way to learn more about yourself. In the English-speaking world, it's made to look hard to keep us separated from other people so these governments can bomb and mine and enslave whoever they want. But in the rest of the world, multilingualism is the norm because language learning doesn't have to be as hard as they've made you believe it is. Fourth, you're not alone. There are millions of people like us all around the US and the UK and Australia and in all corners of the world. There aren't a lot of resources for us, but I'm here to change that. If you want to start relearning your heritage language and taking back your identity, I'm doing it publicly. I could have done it in the shadows and pretended like I didn't forget my own native language. But honestly, I'm just sick of feeling shame about it. I'm putting together a huge list of resources for anybody who, like me, wants to try taking this on. I'm putting them online as I go for free. I'm going to be interviewing experts who can talk to us about their research about people like us. I'm going to be showing progress about my journey with Polish publicly to destigmatize making errors in your heritage language. I know how important this is because it's important to me. So if you're interested in following me as I relearn Polish, you can subscribe right here, you can follow me on Instagram, and you can head over to my website, relearnalanguage.com. If you sign up for my email list over there, I'll send you a once-a-month email with everything that I've learned, discovered, or made that month. And soon I'm going to start a mini-series, which I'll release as a podcast. Will be a whole bunch of little episodes where I talk with linguists who study people like us, and so I can distribute what they're doing and what they're researching. There's no catch. This is just really important to me. Now, if you have any questions about heritage languages or forgetting a native language or relearning a language, leave them in the comments below. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a lot of research, but I want to make sure my videos serve everybody and not just me. I'll be coming back to this video and checking in the comments, so just leave like your language, what questions you have, anything you want, and I'll be referencing that as I go forward and plan more videos. And like I said, if you know somebody this video might help, please, 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 please send it to them. I wish I hadn't felt so alone for so long, and I really want to reach out to them so they can feel a little bit better about their relationship with their native language.